Today, a rare moment of online agreement from prominent voices on both sides of the aisle, joining a chorus of outrage over GOP vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance's 2021 comments criticizing Kamala Harris's leadership.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
Here to discuss, former Ohio Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan, one of the only politicians who has gone up against J.D. Vance. Robin Given is senior critic at large for the Washington Post. Robin, I think for a lot of people, this also speaks to a larger question that has been raised about J.D. Vance and what many people see as a traditional view of the place of women in the world. What more do we know about him and his positions?
Well, I mean, I think for someone to say something like that in the 21st century is, first of all, unkind. And so I think that says a lot about the person who would say it. The second thing is that it does seem to suggest that there is this vision that the role of women is, first of all, to bear children. And if they have not done that, then that in some way makes them less capable or less valuable, or their opinions or their desires less important. You know, the other thing that I would say is that it also seems to really discount the idea of empathy, that you don't have to actually have experienced something in order to have sensitivity to it, an understanding of it, and a desire to make a future that is welcoming and sustainable for future generations. I think it says a lot about the kind of person who would say such a thing.
Congressman, it's a rare thing to unite Meghan McCain, Jennifer Aniston, governors, Taylor Swift fans. And if you add to that some facts, as of 2020, this is the census, 46% of American women did not have children. In a Pew survey just published today of adults under 50 who don't have kids, 47% say they are unlikely to ever have them. Now, since all this bubbled up again on the internet, Kamala Harris hasn't said anything. Does she let the statement speak for itself, especially since it's kind of taken on a life of its own? What do you make of this?
Yeah, she could probably just let it roll, but this just goes to show how bad J.D. Vance is at this. Like we thought we saw it all, but it's going to keep coming. I'm telling you, I ran against them. It's going to keep coming. And the bottom line is Kamala, she does have kids. She has stepchildren. So now you're telling everybody who may have stepchildren that they love, care for, support like they are their own blood children. You're telling all them that they should have a lesser stake in the democracy, because that's the other clip where he says if you don't have kids, you should have less power, less of a voice in the democracy. So if you have stepkids, J.D. Vance is saying that you should not have as many rights as everybody else, including women who don't have any kids at all or any stepkids. So he's just kind of eliminating so many voting blocks with every clip that you see. So keep them coming, J.D. This is great for Kamala Harris. And then you tie that into the fact that he wants a national abortion ban with no exceptions for rape and incest. He said that women should stay in a violent marriage for the sake of the kids, right? He says we need a Caesar in the country. Like, this is a person, him and the former president, they want to control women. They want to say when you can and can't do something with your body. They want to say when you can and can't get out of a marriage. They want to say if you don't have any blood children that you shouldn't have a voice at the ballot box. And Kamala is giving the exact opposite. She's saying it's going to be about all of us. How do we come together? It's not going to be one Caesar. It's going to be the American people. And that's why I think she's doing so well out of the gate. And you add this stuff in, these guys are just unlikable, and they're two dudes that want to try to control women. That's what the bottom line is here.
So, Robin, to Tim's point, Kamala Harris's stepdaughter actually posted online about this. Quote, "How can you be childless when you have cutie pie kids like Cole and I? I love my three parents." I mean, the obvious group that you've offended is women who are childless, but you have step parents. You have many women who have gone through an emotional roller coaster, and men who haven't been able to have children. I mean, the list, Robin, goes on and on and on.
Well, I think that, it's a statement that offends just human beings, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that you have to have children or you have to have a desire to have children that, and you haven't been able to. You don't even have to particularly like children. I mean, I think it's just on its face. It's a ridiculous statement because it suggests that an adult woman is somehow not worthy of and capable of making her own decisions and being able to have a broad view of the world around her, to consider the context, to use a Kamala Harris word, to consider the context in which she lives and in which her neighbors live. I mean, I think that, even if you don't have children, you certainly care about the education of the next generation. You certainly care about the people who will someday perhaps be your neighbors or your doctor or police officers or firefighters. So the whole notion is absurd.
Yeah, and you also wonder, the Republicans have been pretty quiet about this, Tim. We know what happened in 2020. We know how suburban women went away from Donald Trump. They, frankly, as I went from battleground state to battleground state and talked to them, they just didn't like the way he talked. I wonder how Republicans are feeling about this today.
Well, you see an aging and more incoherent Donald Trump, which puts the focus on his vice presidential candidate. It's bad enough that President Trump is supporting all the 2025 initiatives and all of that. But when you see, his diet, his health, his incoherence, he's the oldest president ever to run for president, oldest candidate to ever run for president. How old he would be in 4 years, there's a good chance J.D. Vance would be president of the United States. So you tell all the people who own cats and the women that don't have children and all the people with stepchildren that J.D. Vance could potentially be the next president in the United States, you're going to see a huge backlash. And I think, not to be glib about this, but when you look at the Republican Party, you look at the evangelicals, Jesus did not have children. Right? So you're basically saying that the founder of the Christian faith, the inspiration for the Christian faith, never had any children, and J.D. Vance would think this way, too, about that. So I just think it's important for everybody to, take a step back and see how radical these guys are and what they would want to do. And it comes from a deep insecurity that J.D. Vance has, a deep insecurity that Donald Trump has. And what do people who are deeply insecure do? They try to control everybody else. And that's what we're seeing here.
Robin, I think these are important discussions about how we talk about each other, the way we treat each other. But I mean, to be honest, people are having fun with it, too, if you look online. And there is a group that has proved formidable, Proud Cat Ladies, which automatically means fans of the world's most famous cat lady, Taylor Swift. And I point this out because when Taylor Swift told her 2.8 million Instagram followers to vote last year, 35,000 people registered in the span of 24 hours. That was the highest number that was seen in 3 years. I wonder if the Trump camp realizes the risk of poking the Swiftie bear.
Well, I think oftentimes there's a lot of emphasis or a lot of thought certainly put into sort of formal speeches and, and the talking points that politicians will use. And certainly that makes sense. But oftentimes it is these sort of off the cuff, trying to be cute sort of remarks that are the ones that I think can often be the most revealing. I mean, the reality is that it's not whether or not you have children, it's how you treat children in general.
And other humans, whatever their age. Robin Gibbon, Congressman Tim Ryan, thank you both. Much appreciated.